And I'm Aravis.
And this is Loving the Spectrum.
In today's video, we'll be talking about coming out during lockdown.
So we'll be discussing coming out in terms of being LGBTQ+ and or neurodivergent. Also, stick around till the end of the video and we'll introduce you to our cats.
There's 3 of them. We have some questions to guide today's video, but before we get into them, let's do a rundown of our coming outs up until now, because between the two of us, we've already had quite a few of them.
Yep, that's right. So coming out is actually a lot more complicated than what the media generally tells us. So it's actually very normal to come out multiple times across your life. That's super normal. So let's just get into our stories.
So in terms of my queerness, I came out as bi to my family when I was in grade 12. I don't think I ever used the word bi, but I was like, I like girls, but don't worry, I also still like boys. And then in the year after grade 12, my gap year, I was like, oh no, I don't like boys, I'm a lesbian. And so I came out to everyone again, and that went well both times. It was, everyone was very chill about that. My immediate family, my dad, my mom, and my sister, all completely fine. And then the August before I started university, I came out to all of my friends at the camp I was working at, Camp Narnia, and like all the staff there, and that was like my big like, I'm gonna be out with everyone. And so I decided to be out as I came to university, and I put my rainbow shoelaces into my Vans and started orientation week.
That's how you officially come out.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, rainbow shoelaces in the Vans. That's
1 foot at a time.
So that's my sexuality coming out story. And I was like, oh my god, yay, I'm so glad I figured out my sexuality.
And that's all
done.
set.
And that's everything. I'm done coming out for the rest of my life. And then the gender train hit me. So I started questioning that in first year. And I very much didn't, I shoved that back in my brain real far. Didn't think about it for a while. We can get into the reasons in later videos. So it took a while for me to realize that I was not a cis woman. But once I did, that was just before the summer of 2019. So like winter term, I started to like put they them pronouns on my name tag in lab, and no one used them, and it was great. So I changed my pronouns first, and then when Autumn started using those and all my queer friends started using those, I was like, oh damn, I really like that. I guess I'm definitely not a woman. And that's when I settled on non-binary and eventually came out to the rest of my immediate family in August of that year via phone call, because my sister and my sister was in New Zealand at that point, I think, and my parents were in Vancouver. But yeah, very panicked coming out over the phone, but I did it all in like the span of 3 days, and I was so proud of myself. But yeah, so that's all my queer coming outs. The gender one didn't go as well with my family. Jury is still out on where the conclusion will fall. But yeah, and then in terms of neurodivergency, I have a long history of concussions. So that started when I was 12 in a car accident. And then from there, people started kind of paying more attention to my weird brain stuff. So I, realized over the next couple years or so that I had pretty severe anxiety. That has also ramped up since then, along with like sensory overload issues that I've now realized weren't entirely to do with the concussions. There definitely were some aspects of that before I was ever brain injured. Wow, we got lots of cats right now.
So I did say it was going to be at the end, but since they're here now.
Yeah, they just woke up and they want cuddles.
They just woke up. So this is Goblin. And then this is Phantom.
Hey, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Come here. Hope you can see him.
Well, he doesn't want to lie on his back. We're just gonna...
Do you want to just lift him up just to make sure that you can see?
Okay, this is Phantom. He's the baby.
And this is Goblin. He's also a baby.
He's wearing a crop top right
Yeah.
now. We'll show you the whole
Yeah.
the whole
We'll
outfit.
give you the whole look at the end. We'll give you the...
Anyway,
yeah.
so, where was I in terms of... So, yeah, I realized...
Head stuff.
Head stuff made me realize I had anxiety. And then, you know, at first I was like, I have mild anxiety. And then I was like, I have moderate anxiety. And then I was like, I have severe anxiety. So that was fun. And then I think it was around the beginning of second year when I started kind of thinking I might be autistic, because my new roommates at the time were autistic and had ADHD, and I just related a lot to all the stuff we talked about at home, and we had that was a really good roommate situation, because it was just a whole bunch of neurodivergents being weird and gay all the time. But yeah, so that household and that situation allowed me to think more seriously about, like, maybe I am autistic. And then, you know, we started dating and started talking about stuff more and more. And I would do the whole, like, talking myself into it, being like, damn, I was so autistic my whole childhood, I'm so autistic now. And then I'd be like, no, definitely not. And I'd take a couple weeks and talk myself out of it, and then have a, you know, midnight breakdown and realize I was autistic again. Then you'd be like, yes, I know.
Yeah.
So that took some time to, like, fully process in my brain. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm definitely something, and autism is the thing that fits perfectly right now. If there's ever information in the future that comes out about my life, like some deep-seated trauma that I've been completely burying, that then changes it and makes me think maybe it's not autism that's the root of everything, then we'll see. But for right now, I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. So that's where we are.
Yeah. And then for me, I came out for the first time when I was 17. I originally came out as bi, and then when I was in, I believe, third year university, I came out as a lesbian. Both of those terms felt true at the time. Now I'm going by queer. And once we got into lockdown, that's when I was really able to think about things a bit more. One of the biggest barriers for me to think about my gender has always been my mom. My mom has been very emotionally abusive, has been very homophobic and transphobic for my whole life, and that was definitely the biggest barrier to me being able to talk about my gender. It's wild because, like, as I mentioned in our first video, I've been working with queer and trans people for a long time. Like, I ran our Pride Center on campus. Like, literally my majors were speech communication and gender and social justice, and all of my courses literally focused on talking about being gay. Like, I literally majored in, like, public speaking about being gay. That's what I did my degree on. So, like, I've been teaching, like, LGBT 101 and, like, teaching staff and faculty about transphobia and homophobia, but, like, presenting all this stuff, like, as a cis woman. I'm like, as a cis ally, this is what it means to be trans. Like, and I, like, spending all that time labeling myself as this, like, cis woman practicing allyship and, like, trying to talk to my mom about transphobia and being like, don't worry, I'm not trans. Yeah. I'm an example of a cis person. This is a trans person, my friend. This is how you treat them with basic respect. And, like, continuing to have to do that over and over again, it made it really hard for me to be able to, like, actually put in time to process my own gender. Because, like, realistically, as soon as I figured out that non-binary was a term, I was like, oh, well, yeah, like, I've never connected to gender. But instead of being able to process that, I had to spend all this time arguing to my mom why, like, being trans is valid. But I could never think about it in terms of myself because I always had to be in that position of, like, defending other people. I couldn't let myself until now actually figure out my own stuff. So once lockdown happened in about July, that's when I cut off my mom. So once that happened, I, like, had all of this space to really get into some of my deeper issues and, like, more of my trauma and figure out stuff without having to, like, explain things to other people, or, like, just, like, I can think about my gender without having to worry about coming out to her. I'm like, if I've cut her off, I don't need to ever worry about coming out to her. I can only tell the people I care about and, like, the family that I still have in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a lot easier to, like, actually figure out my gender stuff. So it was actually the same day. It was around, like, September or so. But I figured out that I was non-binary, and then, like, 5 minutes later I realized I was trans. Like, they were within the same, like, brain conversation, I guess. Like, it was, like, in the same, like, moment of just, like, having all these realizations. Like, that started, like, a 2-week period of just, like, all these memories coming back and just, like, figuring out all this stuff about just, like, my brain and my gender and, like, all this stuff. And I don't know if I would have been able to do that if it wasn't for the lockdown. Like, being in this place away from other people and, like, not having to mask, not having to, like, perform my gender in a certain way, not having to, like, interact with people at work thinking I'm a woman. Like, having that space away from people gave me the time and space I needed to, like, actually figure out my gender, which was, like, which has been really important for me. Yeah, so that's been, like, our coming out experiences. Mm-hmm. And then now we'll go on to some of the questions. So first question is, not that it's the most important thing, but are you diagnosed? If so, what is the process? And if not, do you want to be? So in terms of diagnosis, I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety for, like, a couple of years now. And then I graduated from the University of Waterloo back in May, but I had still been on their health plan. So once I started to realize I was autistic, I was like, okay, I want to get diagnosed. I want to see if I can talk to someone about this. So I went and contacted the university psychiatrist and started having some sessions with them. In our first session, he was immediately like, okay, you know what, you definitely seem like you're on the spectrum. Like, all this stuff that you're saying makes a lot of sense. But also, like, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but, like, I think you have OCD. And pretty much by the end of the first session, he had diagnosed me with OCD and said that he was pretty sure I was on the spectrum for ASD, which is, like, autism. But before I can give you a diagnosis, I need to talk to your parents. So I'm like, okay, well, like, the thing is, I'm not talking to my mom anymore. I've, like, cut her off, blah, blah, blah. But, like, she was the most involved in my life. Like, my dad was always there and was always involved, but, like, he wouldn't have noticed all the little things that I'd done. Like, he might not have noticed, like, the stimming that I do and, like, the special interest, because he wasn't as involved in, like, some of those smaller things. So I told the therapist that, and he was like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but just, like, bring your dad in. So I was hoping that, like, he would still listen to what I had to say and kind of, like, take my dad's opinion as, like, extra information. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We went into the next session, and he would ask my dad questions, and my dad would be like, oh, I don't know, like, I didn't notice that, or I wasn't around all the time because, like, I was working, so, like, I wouldn't have noticed that specific thing. Like, their mom would have noticed it, not me. Mm-hmm. Like, so, like, he wasn't saying, like, oh, they didn't do these at all. Like, he wasn't just saying that I didn't do stuff, but he was like, oh, like, I wouldn't have seen it if this happened. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wasn't there for this thing, I might not have seen it. Oh, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, there were things that he did see that he had told the psychiatrist about, but, like, also a bunch of things that, like, he just hadn't noticed, or that I was literally just masking to cover up.
Yeah.
But we pretty much got to the end of the appointment, and after my dad had left the call, the psychiatrist was pretty much just like, yeah, well, you know, after talking to your dad, it doesn't really seem like I can diagnose you. It sounds like you were too happy as a kid, so, yeah. So that was it. So I got the OCD diagnosis, but not the autism one.
Yeah.
Even though, like, literally every time my dad would be like, oh, I don't remember that thing happening, I would literally give 5 examples of, like, the thing. Mm-hmm. And my dad would be like, oh, okay. But, like, because he didn't think of it right away, the therapist, like, the psychiatrist is just like, no, that doesn't count. Mm-hmm.
So, and that whole comment about, like, you were too happy as a kid, that's really highlights the main issue in autism diagnosis, is that all the criteria is based on an autistic person in crisis, in, like, a miserable existence. And if you aren't showing these, like, extreme traits, then you're doing just fine.
Yeah, like, if you're not having a meltdown all the time, then you're not autistic.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if at one point in your life you were having lots of meltdowns, but now you're not anymore, suddenly you're, like, cured or something, or you're just not autistic anymore.
You grew out of it.
Grew out of it. No, that's not how this works. Yeah. And then what was your experience with diagnosis?
So the main time that I've tried to get a diagnosis for mental health stuff was, I went in to try to get an ADHD diagnosis partway through my second year of university, I think it was. And, like, beginning of the interview, I was pretty upfront with the psychiatrist. I was like, yeah, I have social anxiety at the very least, if not, like, generalized anxiety. But at the time, I was underselling it, and I was like, yeah, it's just social anxiety. It's just people that make it bad. Not existence. But yeah, so they did the first, like, psychiatric interview or whatever, and then they did a long day of cognitive testing, which was 6 hours of, like, you know, cognitive testing. It was tiring. I've done a lot of that because of my history of concussions, so it was very repetitive. But yeah, so after all of that, they wrote up their long, like, 35-page report, and were like, here, you have social anxiety. And I was like, cool, I know that. I came for the ADHD diagnosis, but thanks. And so it was basically, they decided that they couldn't give a definitive ADHD diagnosis because of all the overlap with post-concussion syndrome, which I guess is now not a real thing, but just, like, residual concussion issues. And they were like, yeah, it's probably just that. You should go talk to your school's accommodation people and do what you can with that. And that I was already in with accommodation, so it wasn't really all that helpful. But yeah, so that was my only experience with mental health diagnosis. And then in terms of gender stuff, I am diagnosed with gender dysphoria. That's technically the only precursor you're supposed to need to start hormones. So I got that from a psychiatrist partway through second year. I can't remember. Everything's fake. Recently. So I got the gender dysphoria diagnosis from that. And that was a pretty good experience. That, like, isolated meeting with the psychiatrist that I only met once was really good, because he was, like, very, very trusting of, like, what I was telling him about my life experiences, and was like, yeah, it definitely sounds like you have gender dysphoria, and depression and anxiety because of the gender dysphoria, so very likely hormones are the thing that would treat that best. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense. That's what I've been telling my doctor for 4 or 5 months. So yeah, the actual diagnosis went well there, and then bringing that diagnosis back to the doctor, she was very unhappy with it, and in essence was like, he should stay in his lane, even though she sent me to him for the diagnosis. So yeah, it, like, essentially it doesn't even matter if you get a diagnosis. If you have an ableist or transphobic doctor, they're gonna do whatever they want with it.
We're gonna talk more about the experience of getting on testosterone, because that was a shit show, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a whole other video.
Yeah.
You can stick around for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that sums up my experience.
Yeah. And then in terms of, like, do we want to get diagnosed, since neither of us were able to get those formal diagnoses?
Mm-hmm. For me, it's not something I want to seek out. It would probably be more traumatic and invalidating than anything, because I'm definitely one of the people they would classify as, like, high functioning and be like, oh, but you're fine. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I can't hold a job or be in school. But they're like, oh, you can say big words sometimes. And I'm like, yeah.
They're like, you could hold a job if you actually wanted to. You're just choosing not to right now. I definitely think you're high functioning enough if you tried.
High functioning. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so I have no intention of seeking out a diagnosis as of this point in my life. I don't want to start any meds or anything, and there's nothing that I would need a diagnosis for right now, so I'm, like, fine with it.
Yeah, I'm like, I tried, it didn't work. That was the only free option I had, so I'm not going to try again, probably.
Maybe eventually, if
maybe
our
eventually,
health coverage changes.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe if this Canadian universal healthcare becomes universal healthcare, we'll do it. Who can say? But as of right now, I don't really think I'm going to look into trying again, just because last time was so awful.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather not do that again.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And you got away with the OCD diagnosis anyway.
Yeah,
so
exactly. And I didn't even plan to get that. And I just got that one too.
That one's useful.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, that one's, like, having an OCD diagnosis, I feel, is a bit more helpful for when I go to, like, hospitals and stuff in the future. Because, like, I have a lot of issues with, like, needles. So being able to tell them, like, hey, I have OCD, can you please not put the IV in until, like, the latest moment? I will have a panic attack. Like,
yeah.
Being able to, like, get that diagnosis definitely helps.
Mm-hmm.
Although, like, that's, I guess I wouldn't really need a formal diagnosis to be able to tell them that, but, like, it's helped, at least in my mind, having that formal diagnosis, but self-diagnosis is, like, super valid, and it really... Yeah.
Okay, so question number 2. Do you think that your neurodivergency is related to your queerness?
And then I'm also going to connect that one to the third question and add, what is your understanding of gender?
Mm-hmm.
So, for me, like, my queerness and my gender have been so tied to my autism once I realized I was autistic. Like, thinking about my gender, like, it is just such a performance. I can't separate it from masking because they just feel so intertwined. Like, there's no way that I can perform as myself without thinking about the societal ideas of, like, gender and sexuality. And, like, same thing with polyamory. Like, one of the big things about autism is, like, not understanding social norms, and that has always felt so true to me. Like, I've never understood why someone's genitals should have anything to do with the kind of person they are and the kind of life they live and, like, what experiences they have. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Same thing with, like, monogamy, especially, like, toxic monogamy culture and, like, jealousy stuff. Like, that goes right over my head. Jealousy I do not understand. Jealousy specifically, like, I don't like, that's never really been an emotion that I've connected to. Like, I've never felt, like, upset when someone is doing something else. When someone is doing something with someone else. Like, if I'm still getting the love and attention and affection and whatever else that I need from this person, like, why should I care what else they're doing with their life? Like, I don't own that person. Like, why should I have any expectations in what they're doing when they're not with me? Like, that's just never really made any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like, my gender and, like, sexuality have always just been, like, outside of whatever the rules or norms are. Like, when even just, like, thinking of, like, what term specifically under non-binary feels the most accurate for me in terms of, like, agender or genderqueer or, like, demi-boy or demi-girl. Like, for me, I think, like, genderqueer makes the most sense because just queer is, like, literally just embodies everything I am because it's literally just not the norm.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's it. Mm-hmm. Just not the norm.
Not cis, not straight.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
I just don't want... or don't really feel like I can just follow all of whatever these societal rules are.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
I think I also agree to a lesser degree. It's more of a, like, side effect for me, I think, rather than completely intertwined. One thing that's definitely... I changed my name when I was 7, so my parents initially couldn't decide on a name, and then they were like, I guess Emma? And then when I was 7, I was like, I'm gonna choose Aravis, if that's cool. And my parents were like, okay. And I just feel like that moment, like, it encapsulates so much about, like, it was so trans of me to just be like, I'm gonna change my name to a very gender-neutral, like, fantasy name from the Narnia books. And it was, like, also very autistic, to be honest, because, like, I remember being so confused when my one teacher at school wasn't fine with it, and this was, like, my parents had been fine with it, which is very, very rare. I feel like most parents would be a lot more thrown by their kid being like, don't call me by my name anymore. I'm changing it completely, like, at that young at least. But they were completely fine with it, and like my main second grade teacher was fine with it. She was really cool. But then my like English teacher wasn't fine with it. And I remember going into English class that like first day back after I'd changed my name over the weekend. And she was like, okay kids, don't forget to like write in your names at the top of the page. And I was like, oh, Miss Cano, I changed my name over the weekend, but I don't know how to spell it yet. What should I do? Like, should I just sound it out? Should I just guess? And she was like, well, write your real name? And I was like, okay, I'll just guess?
It's like, no, you don't understand. I'm not writing the old name. I'm asking how to write the new one.
It was such a classic miscommunication, because she was very clearly like, that's dumb, child. Write down Emma. That's your given name. And I was like, okay, write down your real name means guess at Aravis. But she did not mean that. But anyway, so that was like, I just did not understand why someone wouldn't be okay with that. Which I think, yeah, that's just an explanation of societal norms and them going right over my head. I think the idea of changing names is great. I loved when you changed your name. But yeah, so in terms of that specific moment, and also just like my gender being so nebulous on the spectrum, like it's just vague non-binariness. I don't know where exactly I fall in relation to male or female, but it's just like not those. And then I'm just kind of blah, in between. And yeah, I feel like that also fits. Like it, yeah, I don't know. It all fits. It's all autistic.
Yeah. And the next question. Number 4, I'm going to add 4 and 5 together. So what should medical people know about experiences of self-diagnosis? And then what should we, in brackets, doctors, do to empower neuro-atypical people who don't have a formal diagnosis? So I think for one, just like the first thing is just understanding that getting diagnosed formally just is not accessible. Like, don't question, like,
for the large majority of people.
For a large majority of people, it's not accessible. So don't, like, overly question them about why they haven't gotten diagnosed, because there are so many reasons for that. Yeah, like, there are just so many reasons why someone can't get a diagnosis. Did you want to give some of the examples?
Yeah, so I've had 2 separate instances of just bad examples of how to deal with someone disclosing their self-diagnosis, and one very good example. So the first 2 were like the exact same response. A therapist back at university, and then a speech pathologist that I was going to for a very brief time last year. I was, to both of them, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I might be autistic, and that was just kind of a like, included in the brief disclosure about me, just kind of the general, this is who I am, this is where I'm at in terms of my mental health and gender stuff. So I'd be like, yeah, I'm a lesbian, I'm non-binary, I have been on testosterone for however long, and I think I might be autistic. And it was very clearly not presented as like a, hey, tell me if I'm autistic. It was a self-diagnosis. Like, it was a, hey, this is what the conclusion that I have come to after however many hours of self-discovery. And both of their immediate responses were, I'm not qualified to diagnose it, but I'm pretty sure you're not autistic. And that's just, like, it's so few words, it's such a quick and thoughtless statement. I could tell both of them were just like, they just said it without thinking. But it's like, that's just such, like, first of all, if you're not qualified, don't give me your opinion on it. Because you're not qualified. You just told me you weren't. Second of all, I hadn't given either of them any background. They hadn't given me any opportunity to give any background on, like, why I thought I was autistic. They hadn't even done, like, a family history or anything. And, like, just immediately jumped to, but, like, my personal opinion is that based on what I can see, you're not autistic. And very clearly they were making that assumption based off of me as a masking human. Because, like, I'd only met these people, like, a handful of times. This was my first time seeing the speech pathologist in person. And I, like, hadn't even come out as trans to her yet because she was a middle-aged white woman. And I, you know, you bide your time with that. And the autism reveal didn't go well, so, yeah. So yeah, those are great examples of what not to do. And good example, I had a very refreshing appointment with a new therapist yesterday, or the day before, I can't remember, recently. And I mentioned that I was pretty sure I was autistic, and she started by validating that, and was like, I'm glad that you found, like, a label or, like, an identity or whatever that makes sense, and that, like, connects the most things in your life together. And then she followed that up with talking about, she's a trauma-specific therapist, so she was talking about how, like, while this is a good self-diagnosis for right now, there might be more information that comes up during therapy sessions that would, like, possibly change that outcome. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I was completely on board with that, because for me, I'm, like, obviously I haven't gotten any degrees in anything in the psychology field, so they are the experts in terms of the actual science of it. I'm just the expert in terms of my life experiences. So you need to collaborate to some degree. And I think that's the main thing, is she didn't invalidate me immediately, but she also repeated the fact that, like, we're gonna work together on this, and, like, if we do find out more things, don't be scared about not being autistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, there's so many different ways that you can talk about things. And yeah, I think that was a really good example of, like, a good way to go about it. What's the next question? What's something you want to say to fellow white queer people?
Oh, did we want to go to the second part first?
Oh, yes, sorry. Before that question, what can doctors do to empower neurotypical people who don't have a formal diagnosis?
So, yeah, again, just validate the self-diagnosis to whatever degree is logical. Like, obviously, if someone's self-diagnosis seems completely off base after they've told you, like, why they've self-diagnosed this way, then provide your expertise and, like, provide them knowledge. Mm-hmm. But, like, the first instinct should always be validating before you have any background, before you have anything else. Go-to should be validating.
I remember something I was going to say before. Also, just, like, with that whole just immediate, oh, I don't think you're autistic, it's very similar to, oh, but, like, I don't think you're disabled. It makes it seem like autism is a dirty word, and it's like, oh, no, you don't have to use that label for yourself. You're not damaged. You're not autistic. So, I'm like, the quick reaction to tell someone, oh, no, you're not actually autistic, or you're not actually trans, or whatever it is.
It's
like,
not as good a reaction.
It's not the kind reaction or whatever it is that you're expecting it is.
It's not comforting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question number 6.
Question number 6 was, what's something you want to say to fellow white queer people? So kind of just going back to the questions about self-diagnosis and, like, what diagnosis looks like. Mm-hmm. The accessibility of getting diagnosed and getting proper, like, treatment and care and accessibility is so dependent on, like, other aspects of your identity. Mm-hmm. Like, what your gender is, what your race is, like, all of those things play a very big deal in, like, the kind of treatment an autistic person gets. Mm-hmm. So I totally forgot where I was going with that.
Okay. Should we restart?
No, I didn't want to do any editing. Okay. So I just want to keep talking.
Something you want to say to fellow white queer people?
Yeah.
You were talking about how diagnosis is just very different depending on your intersecting identities.
Yes.
Basically, for other white queer people, your whiteness is a lot more beneficial than you think it is, even as a queer disabled person. Because the barriers that you would face as a queer disabled person of color are, like, so magnified, it's unimaginable. and like the whole stigmas around it change completely.
Yeah.
And essentially, as a white queer person, you should never assume that your experiences coming out are anything like the experiences of a person of color coming out, even if your identities align, or even if like your family dynamics seem to align, because there are so many more factors at play that like we just literally don't have the life experience to know about, and that's okay, but like just don't assume that your experiences are the same.
Another aspect of diagnosis that's very different for white people versus people of color is overdiagnosis versus underdiagnosis. So there are a lot of white disabled people that might have to like push more to get certain diagnoses.
Like AFAB white girls.
Yeah, like AFAB white people like have a really hard time getting diagnosed with autism.
Yeah,
because
like
you're generally seen as being like quirky. Versus like racialized people might be more likely to get overdiagnosed or get diagnosed with something like schizophrenia or bipolar before actually finding the proper diagnosis. So there's generally like a lot more extra diagnosis before you find the proper one, or it literally just getting criminalized. And like there's so many horrible and violent things that happen because of ableism and white supremacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that it boils down to, is that like ableism comes from white supremacy, so your whiteness does protect you no matter what. Like even if you are disabled, you're still white.
And it's not like a trump card. Like just because you're disabled or you're queer or you're trans, it doesn't mean you can't be racist. Like no matter how much work you do to educate yourself to like be a good person or whatever it is that you think you're doing, like, you will always be racist. At the end of the day, I will always be racist. Aravis will always be racist because we're white. We are white people raised in a white society that is run by white supremacy and capitalism and all of these things that make us who we are. And you don't get to a point that you just stop, like, getting the privileges from society. Like, I'm never going to stop benefiting from my whiteness, therefore I will always continue to benefit from like the racist society that we live in. Yeah.
That sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. Next question then. Okay. How can you deal with self-diagnosis and imposter syndrome?
And then self-diagnosis, like specifically imposter syndrome about your self-diagnosis. Yeah. So separately, they are obviously terrible, and then together they're even worse. No, self-diagnosis is not terrible on its own. Never mind. I don't know what I'm saying. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sorry. Self-diagnosis can give like a lot of imposter syndrome because of the way that we like just medicalize everything and expect people to like have to get some kind of diagnosis in order to be valid. Honestly, it's really hard. Like for me, like I have just realized like the autism stuff pretty like still somewhat recently over the past few months. So like I'm still dealing with like the imposter syndrome of like my self-diagnosis, but like one of the things that I've found that's helped has been having a little notebook to write stuff down in. So I have like what I call my little autism notebook where I like write down different stims, different like special interests that I've had over the years, just like any different autistic traits that I have, or like memories that I'm like, oh, that was like really autistic when I was young. Like I'll just go and write that story in there so that when I go to therapy, I can talk about it. Or if I'm just having a bad day where I'm just doubting myself a lot, I can go and look at that and be like, okay, yeah, like I definitely am autistic. That's valid.
And then for me, back when I was questioning my autism a lot more, it was just really helpful having a supportive partner that I could bounce things off of. Because like when I was realizing my autism, most of it was through verbal working things out with you. And so every time I was in kind of a downward spiral of questioning myself and being like, oh, I'm not disabled, I'm just lazy and bad at everything, then you'd be able to be there and just kind of regurgitate everything that I had already told you. And that was really, really helpful.
Yeah. Honestly, having people to just like bounce your ideas off of helps a lot. So like if you can't write it down, telling it to someone and being like, hey, I'm having a bad day, I'm doubting myself a lot, can you give me a few of those examples back? And then having them kind of reread that stuff back to you can be really helpful.
Definitely.
Next question, is having neurotypical friends/family exhausting for you?
It can be.
Yeah. But also, like, part of that is learning what my own needs are. Because, like, I don't really even know what I need yet. So, like, I can have family members that want to help and be as supportive as possible and be like, hey, like, what can I do to make this event more accessible? Or, like, hey, what can I do to help? And I can, like, right now, a lot of the time, like, I literally don't know. I don't know what I need right now. Like, because a lot of it is still, like, figuring out what my support needs are because I've had them unmet for such a long time. So, like, figuring out what my needs are and what boundaries I should have so that the neurotypical people in my life know what's going on and, like, know what kind of things to abide to would be really helpful. But it's been really nice being in lockdown and, like, having social space from everyone for a bit and just having that time away from masking and, like, having to just perform everything.
Yeah, honestly, one of the, it's not like, well, it eventually becomes exhausting, but one of the most common things with neurotypical friends and family is just more often miscommunications, especially to do with, like, eye contact or body language, or, like, facial expressions, because especially if I'm not actively masking or if I've just spaced out and forgotten what my face is doing, which happens a lot of the time, people will, like, stop and be like, whoa, are you okay? And I'll have to, like, rearrange my face real quick and try to figure out what I was looking like before so I can reassure them that I'm, like, not in pain or constipated or whatever. And so that can get a little bit disconcerting, especially because I usually don't realize that my face is doing something until someone is like, are you okay? And then I'm like, oh, wait, what was I doing something weird? So then I just get very, like, self-conscious, and then that does get exhausting. But yeah.
And then the next question, number 9, is if we have any resources or recommendations for family and friends who want to learn more. I have one that I'm going to talk about today. This is one of my favorite books ever. Literally one of the most life-changing reads I've ever had, and I read this before I even realized I was disabled, so, like, rereading it now has been amazing. So it's called Brilliant Imperfections, Grappling with Cure by Eli Clare. Unfortunately, there is no audiobook version right now. I have reached out to the author to ask because I really wanted the audiobook, but currently it's not available right now. But if you can't read it yourself, have a friend, partner, family member, if you have a bird that can read, I don't know, anyone that can read it out loud to you, that would be really great. That's what we've been doing. We've been going, like, back and forth, reading it loud to each other, but it's a really, really good book. Pretty much it talks about the medical industrial complex, more specifically talking about just the ideology of cure and what exactly that looks like, specifically in terms of disabled people, queer people, fat people, racialized people, like, how has white supremacy tried to cure all of these different things, and what does that look like? What does that mean? Like, should we be trying to cure things? And it's just a really, really good book. I'd highly recommend it. It's a really accessible read. All the chapters are really, really short. The language is really accessible. I can't recommend it enough. So if you want to check this out, it's Grappling with the Cure. Or Brilliant Imperfections, blah, 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 blah. It is Brilliant Imperfections, Grappling with Cure by Eli Clare. And then, do you want to read the last question?
Question number 10. So many people have shared stories about relationship challenges during lockdown. If you are comfortable sharing, how has coming out and learning about being neurodivergent all while being in lockdown impacted your relationship? It has not impaired our relationship. That's the answer.
It has improved it. Yeah. The other I word.
Which it was already really good.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this in the run-through beforehand, and I was getting all sappy about how, like, yeah, we already worked ridiculously well when we just knew I was neurodivergent, and we hadn't figured out your stuff yet. And then once we figured out Autumn's stuff, it just, everything made a lot more sense as to why we work so well together. And, like, why our sense of humor clicked immediately.
And, like, communication styles.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, communicating with other neurodivergent people is so easy. It is so much better. It is so nice. It's just, like, the communication styles just mesh so easily. Like, if you're dating right now, like, try and date other neurodivergent people. It just, I would highly recommend it. But also, like, for me, with my OCD, like, figuring that out and having such an incredible partner has, like, helped so much because, like, I've been able to figure out, like, what things I can and can't do and what things are really, like, triggering for me in my intrusive thoughts. So, like, an example, like, I have a really, really hard time being around knives. Like, whether I'm using them, holding them, anything, like, it makes me really uncomfortable because I feel like I'm gonna hurt myself.
Intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, intrusive thoughts. They're bad. So, instead of forcing myself to, like, cut up stuff to make food, Aravis now does that. So, like, they now do, like, the chopping and peeling and stuff. So, we have, like, our own, like, division of labor between the two of us that we've, like, figured out. So, like, we have our cats. And then, like, I have my OCD stuff, and they have, like, different sensory issues, and, like, I have heat stuff, so we figured out, like, what household chores fit best between, like, both of us.
Like, their heat stuff doesn't allow them to be in the laundry room because it's really hot down there. So I do all the physical act of laundry, and then once everything is clean, I bring it up, and they sort everything.
Yeah. So then I do all the sorting, I do all the organizing, so, like, my OCD helps a lot with, like, organizing stuff around the house. So, like, I've organized all of our clothes, and, like, I have all the stuff folded in the same way and, like, organized in the same way. So, like, they do all the laundry, they bring it back, and then I go and put all the stuff away. So it's nice just figuring out ways to do things that work well for us.
And then I do all the gross stuff, all the hazardous waste that the cats output, and then the dishes and stuff. Yeah. It's been working really well. And honestly, just, like, communicating about your needs, like, being mentally ill is hard, and, like, executive functioning skills, hard. Like, hard. It's just hard. So, like, if you can communicate what your needs are with your partner and, like, explain why certain chores are really hard for you to do, like, that will make a really big difference. So, like, honestly, figuring out our stuff, like, together has been really amazing, and it's just nice to be able to talk through stuff together and be like, oh wow, like, I do that too, and just it's just been really nice. Okay, so that's it for all of our questions. So as we promised, we are going to do all of our cat introductions. So this one's full name is Bartholomew, Bat for short. We came up with the nickname before the full name. He is what, a year and a half, 2 years old? He's a year and a half now. Actually, almost 2 years. He does not like to be. He's the one that likes to be held the least. Yeah. So he's not having a great time, but he's also the softest. He's so soft. Which makes it very difficult because we want to hold him and kiss him all the time. Yeah. Isn't that right? Yeah. Yeah. He's a tall, long boy. Yeah. A long, tall boy. Oh my god. Okay. Cat number 2, we have Goblin. You met earlier. He's wearing his Hollywood crop top right now. I don't know if you can read that. I got it from Build-A-Bear. If you didn't know, Build-A-Bear clothes fit great on your pets. Yeah, look how handsome he looks. Okay, yeah. He also doesn't want to be held. And then this is Phantom. Phantom is the baby, as we mentioned earlier. Yeah, Phantom is currently, well, he's spraying a lot, and it's not good, but he's getting his balls chopped off in a matter of weeks. And so then we won't have a stinky house. Say goodbye to these fluffy little guys. They will be clipped. Oh wait, let's show him. Trouble pups. No, okay. He's running away. We call them trouble pups. They will be gone soon though. What? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, that's the whole family. And yeah, if you noticed,
our cat that was in our last video. His name was Ghost. That was actually our last day with him because he was a foster baby. So we had been fostering him for a couple months until the holidays were done so we could find him his new forever home, and that was actually our last day with him. So he made his way on screen before he left.
But he's doing
he's doing great. He has a great new dad. We've been getting videos and like updates, and he's doing great. He's so sweet. We're glad he has a new family. But yeah, so we're glad we were able to introduce our cats for you guys. And yeah, just huge thank you to everyone that sent us questions for today's video. We've really loved getting all of your feedback, and it's been really, really nice to see so much support.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to this week's video. If you have any questions or comments, you can drop them below or on our Facebook or Instagram or whatever. We don't have an Instagram. We have
no Instagram yet. Yeah.
Anyway, Facebook. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated.
See you next time. Bye.